Welcome to Chicks Who Fly, a podcast dedicated to women pilots and women in aviation. My name is Anaya, and I am your host. I am a vocalist, a DJ, and a producer, and I'm also a student pilot. I am currently working on my private pilot certificate, and while I am getting some finances in place to finish my training, I have decided to stay active in the aviation community by starting this podcast, among other things. I plan to interview and feature different women pilots and women in aviation and bring those interviews to you. And hopefully you guys enjoy the interviews as much as I enjoy spending time with these amazing ladies. Today we get to speak with Pilar Wolfsteller. Pilar is a journalist and a private pilot who was told by a teacher at 16 years old that she was not smart enough to become a pilot and an engineer. Pilar believed her and transferred out of class, and later went on to become a successful journalist. As an adult, she decided to revisit her love for aviation and gave herself her private pilot certificate as a birthday gift. Pilar shares with us how she learned to fly in Germany and later on had to pass an FAA checkride in the United States in order to get her FAA certificate. Pilar is based in San Francisco, and she is currently working on her instrument rating and intends to become a CFI in order to help women of all ages realize that becoming a pilot is a real possibility for them. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation that I got to have with Pilar Wolfsteller. Welcome. I'm super excited to have you on. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks very much for your interest.
My pleasure. Your story sounded amazing. What got you interested in aviation originally, and how did all of this journey get started for you?
So when I was 6 years old, my family was planning a move from the East Coast of the United States to Asia. And my father had been transferred to Indonesia for his job, and we were to travel from Philadelphia via Los Angeles, Hawaii, Guam, down to Singapore, and then to Indonesia. This was 1976, so a long time ago. And I remember when I got off the plane in Los Angeles, we were disembarking, my family, my brother, my sister, and my parents. I stopped by the cockpit and I looked inside, and I turned to my mom and I said, "Mom, I want to drive an airplane someday." And she looked down at me and patted my little blonde head and said, "Of course you do, dear," and smiled. And probably thought that was the end of that. But as I grew up, I spent more and more time being interested in aviation. Obviously, because we lived in Asia, we traveled quite a bit as a family, visiting all sorts of places. We always traveled back home to the East Coast every summer for home leave that was provided by my father's employer. So I was in airplanes a lot. I was in airports a lot. I learned to find my way around the most complicated terminals, as an 8-year-old. And my mom always tells the story that she just didn't pay attention to where we were going because she knew that I would lead them to the right gate. And so that interest grew, obviously, as I got older. And when it came time in high school to start thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I really wanted to become an engineer. I wanted to become a pilot. I wanted to become an astronaut, like many little girls at that age. And I bought all the books about space. I followed every space shuttle, launch and landing and mission. I learned when I was at those airports, I could identify most commercial aircraft from half a mile away. So this was my thing. I was preparing myself for a career in engineering and aerospace somehow. Until the first couple of days of 12th grade, when I signed up for 12th grade physics, which was a requirement if I was going to apply to engineering schools. And on the third day of class, my teacher took me aside and said to me, I don't think you're going to make it. I really think you should transfer out of my class. And
Whoa.
Of course, I was shattered, and I didn't know. I knew I was having trouble, but I guess at the time, it was not. It was a case of you just didn't get it, and not a case of, well, maybe it was bad teaching. So I transferred out of the class, and I thought that my future was going to be flipping hamburgers at McDonald's for the rest of my life, because I was told that I was just, more or less just too dumb to do this and to follow my dream. So, at 16, every drama is a drama, and the drama passed, but I was still very sad, and I chose another career in the end. I became a journalist. I got a bachelor's degree in history and went on to a journalism school for my master's degree, and I had a very successful and fulfilling journalism career overseas. I left after my master's degree. I went over to Europe, and I spent about 20 years there working as a journalist first, and then moving over to the corporate side as well. But that dream of flying never left me. So when I was 25, I actually had a flight with a good friend's uncle who had a small Cessna 152. He took me up just for fun, and I thought, oh man, I have to do this. I have to go back and do this. Even though I couldn't turn it into a career at that time, I thought I had gotten too old already to turn it into a career. I said, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it for myself. So I spent the next 5 years saving up for flight training. I put away a little bit for my salary every month into a savings account for 5 years, and decided that I was going to give myself my private pilot's license for my 30th birthday. When I turned 30, I marched down to the nearest flight school, and I signed up for ground school. And
what country were you in at this point?
I was living in Germany at the time. I was living in Berlin, and the nearest flight school was down in the south of the city at Schönefeld Airport, which is the airport that they're building up to become the new capital city airport in Berlin. And at the time, there was a flight school there, and I found them, in the yellow pages. This is before we had Google, and I went down there and I paid my deposit, and I signed up for a ground school, which started a couple of weeks later. And it was May, so my birthday is the end of May, and my very first lesson in an aircraft was on August 1st in the year 2000.
What was it like? First of all, what's the governing body? Is it per country, or is it for all of Europe?
At the time, it was the German authority. It was a German flight authority that I was flying under. In the meantime, the EASA, which is the European Union flight authority, it's the entire group of countries, but at the time it was the German authority.
And so you were fluent in German as well as English always?
So my family is German, and I grew up speaking German at home, but my entire schooling and university system was all in English. So I had German like one would speak with one's family, one's parents and relatives. And when I went to Europe after graduate school, I had to learn professional German, right? I had to learn how to write professionally, and I had to learn how to speak at a higher level and understand at a higher level, obviously, because that was, my jobs were dependent on it. So yes, I spoke German and I understood German, enough to understand conversation and I have a very good German accent because I learned it as a child and I didn't learn it as an adult. But all of the technical things and all of the, aviation language obviously is very specialized. And, and there are terms that, even today flying in the United States that, I only know in German. I had to learn in English afterwards. So I learned how to fly in a German environment, even though all of the communication on the radios in, ICAO language is English. So, most of the big airports, or actually all of the big airports in Europe, they must communicate in English, and the small airports, it's optional, but you usually do communicate in German, but they should be able to communicate on the radios in English.
Right, but it's definitely not the same as I learned myself, because I speak Italian, but not in a professional way. Like, I can converse with people, and I applied as an Italian-speaking flight attendant for Delta.
Oh, wow.
And I realized when I was doing the interview that what works with friends and acquaintances doesn't cut it in a professional environment. It's a whole other level for sure.
Yeah, and I learned that when I went to Germany, after spending many, many years in English language environments. I went to Germany in the first 3 weeks. I didn't say a word because I wasn't sure of myself, and I had to, get back into that mindset, right? It's a very different type of language when you're using it on a working level as opposed to when you're speaking to family and friends.
Correct. So then what did your training look like? And I believe you mentioned that you were currently working on your instrument rating.
Correct. So I think the training in Germany at the time, keep in mind this was 20 years ago, right? This was the year 2000, 2001. I did my checkride in April 2001. I can't speak to what the training is like today, but at the time, I remember the requirement was 35 hours. I didn't manage to get my checkride until I was over 42 hours, which for me was a bit of a disaster. But, as I understand it, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, there are people that need 70, 80, 90 hours just because the airspace here is so complex. So I guess 42 hours wasn't that bad. So when I lived in Europe, obviously I flew on my European license. I moved back to the U.S. about 6 years ago. Tried to maintain my European currency as, on a restricted FAA license. So that means that I had to maintain all of my European requirements in order for the FAA to license me so that I could fly here. But it was always restricted. And I found that the requirements were just really, really onerous to keep up because, for example, if you are flying on a European license, then when you do your every 2 years, your refresher with an instructor, it has to be a European certified instructor. You can't do it with an FAA instructor. You have to have a European certified medical examiner to do your medical every 2 or 5 years. So that was a problem living here in the United States, trying to find someone with European credentials to confirm my currency every 2 years. I actually had to fly to Florida for the medical and unfortunately I found an instructor and a medical examiner within about 3 hours drive of each other. So I flew from San Francisco to Orlando, commercial, in order to meet up with the flight instructor that would sign me off. And then I went to the medical the next day so I could get a new medical. There is, believe it or not, I have not yet found a medical examiner under EASA rules west of the Rockies. And I have not found a flight instructor under EASA rules west of the Rockies. So that became a real problem. It was either, fly to Florida and do it or fly back to Europe and do it. And, I had a job here and limited vacation time. I couldn't do that. And also limited finances, right? If it comes down to it.
Right.
So last year, or about 18 months ago, I decided that I was going to finally get my FAA unrestricted license. So I had all the aviation experience. I have about 300 hours altogether in my life since I did my certificate in Europe in 2000. So I had the aviation experience, but I had to, hit the books again to do the written test and then the practical check ride here, which I found incredibly difficult. I thought it was so hard, and it seemed so much harder than it was 20 years ago in Europe. I know that's hard to believe, but it was just so difficult. Fortunately, I had a DP that was that I don't want to. He didn't go easy on me. That's not what I want to say. I think he understood that I knew how to fly and that I was a responsible pilot, and that I had the experience more than your average candidate that comes in with, 70 or 80 hours under their belt. Right.
Right.
So I think he was extremely fair. And he explained to me also some of the differences between European style and FAA acceptance. He actually, failed me on my first try.
Oh.
But he did pass me on my second try, which was fortunate. And so now I have my FAA unrestricted license, and I am working on my instrument rating here in the United States.
Awesome. And what are some of those differences in the European style versus FAA?
So there's differences in airspace. There's a lot of, rules that, I keep saying you learn them for the test and then you forget them because you never need them. There's a lot of, legal things that are a bit different. We never flew, turns around a point or S-curves or stuff like that. We just never, that was not part of my training. It was a lot of navigation. It was a lot of technical. I mean, Germany, they teach you how to basically take apart an engine and put it back together. A lot of the laws and the rules, emergency situations, but some of the maneuvers that I was unfamiliar with before I came here. Stalls are slightly different. So just a lot of just details, just details that are, they're not irrelevant in daily flying, but they are, over there they fly straight and level like we fly straight and level. There's just a bit, slight differences in the laws that you have to know, or like I said, the airspace or the regulations that are a little bit more detailed here than where I grew up learning how to fly.
Do you think that's because of the country, or it's because it's been 20 years and aviation has changed in general?
It could be. I think that a lot of it has changed. I think aviation in general, general aviation has changed. Look at what we've been through in 20 years. I mean, I got my license before 9/11, so there are a lot of things also in terms of security that have changed since then for us here in the United States as well. So, I don't want to compare the year 2000 in Germany with the year 2019 in the United States, because I think if I went back to Germany, perhaps things would be very different there as well. I can't really compare that. All I know is that I spent the last, 19 years flying and having fun and trying to keep up with all the regulations both here and in Europe. And I feel like, now I'm back in the U.S., I should really concentrate on what's relevant here. I think also, in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a really busy airspace. I mean, it's crazy busy. You have San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, all in a really small proximity to each other. And between those three big airports, you have the secondary airports like Hayward Executive, which is where I fly out of. You've got Reed Hillview down San Jose. You've got Concord. Over on the other side of the bay, you've got San Carlos. You've got Half Moon Bay. You've got Palo Alto. I mean, you've got all these small little airports around where there's just a lot going on in this airspace. And, it's quite a change from, yes, I was flying in controlled airspace in Europe, but this is crazy busy controlled airspace here. And you're always watching out for someone else. So that's been a big shift too.
Right. Los Angeles is the same. You have LAX and you have Van Nuys and Burbank and Hawthorne and Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And then you have like the stuff up in Oxnard. It's pretty crazy. And then I flew out here in Palm Springs, where I'm planning to complete my training, and it was the summer in the desert, and apparently we were the only people crazy enough to go flying on a day when it was like 110, and you're like up there, and it's an uncontrolled airport that I was flying out of, which is Bermuda Dunes. Nobody was on the radio. It was just us.
Yeah, but that is kind of crazy. That is kind of nuts.
Yes, but I just wanted to check out the school, and plus I've had like the craziest week or so. My husband and I were in Florida doing some family stuff, and then we came back Friday night. I woke up early Saturday, went to Malibu to work. Then I drove back in the evening, slept a few hours, drove with my husband all the way back to Santa Monica where he dropped me off because I had a fly-in with the 99s. And by total coincidence, the fly-in was going to be to Palm Springs. I drove down, and then I flew back up here with the ladies in a Piper, and then I had considered flying back with them and then just driving back up with my husband, but I had woken up at 3 a.m. and all of this seems crazy. I was so exhausted, but dude, anything to, get in an airplane and fly a little more and, inch forward.
I get it. Totally get it. Yeah, it's crazy, but I think, if you have that aviation bug, then, it's completely normal.
Absolutely. How often do you get to fly now?
So right now I do we get a lot of visitors from Europe, and I tend to, whenever we get someone here, I tend to take them up for a bay tour, which is probably the most spectacular part of their West Coast vacations that the Europeans can have. So I do quite a few of the bay tours. Now that I'm doing my instrument training, I've been flying quite a bit more with my instructor, under the hood. I've also been doing the sim. So in the last 3 or 4 months, I've been up, more often, I'd say once, twice a week. But obviously, on a regular basis, it all costs money, and, we're all very keenly aware of that. And even though it is my first love, it's sometimes hard on the financial side of it.
Correct. And you have another love, so now you're probably, I remember you said in your message that you're finally get to combine them both, and I can relate to that. Can you speak a little more about that?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I chose a career in journalism, and when I finished university, I went over to Europe, and I worked for the news agency Bloomberg and Reuters for quite some time. And I was covering, breaking news where it happened. I did a lot of politics, economics. I did a lot of, humanitarian disasters, crisis situations. I covered the war in Iraq in 2003. I did all sorts of, crazy journalism, and I always wanted to try and combine this love of aviation with something that I knew I was good at, and my skills and my abilities as a journalist. I left journalism in 2006 to go into corporate communications and public relations for a while, and I just thought that was where my career was going to lead me. I think it seemed natural. A lot of journalist friends of mine were going the PR route, but I don't think I was ever really very happy there. I had a lot of very cool jobs, no doubt about it, but I wanted to return to journalism, and I didn't dare to dream that there was actually a journalism job where I could use my aviation knowledge and passion. But I found it. I actually found that job. And since September of this year, I joined an outfit called Flight Global. It's a UK-based website, and they've got 2 magazines attached. One's called Flight International. The other one's called Airline Business. And I'm now America's air transport editor for Flight Global. And I am able to spend my days reading and writing about aviation, airlines, air transport, anything that flies. And I am so happy. I am the happiest I've been in a really long time, because I get to combine these 2 loves and these 2 passions, and finally doing what I've always wanted to do.
That's really inspiring. My goals involve a project that I'm not yet ready to like share with the world, but it involves music and aviation. And when you get to combine those things, I mean, I mentioned in the last podcast, I think if I were able to make this project happen, I think I might just explode from the sheer happiness of getting to combine my passions, you know? I mean,
yeah, and it feels really good. And when it happens, I promise you, it'll happen at the right time, and it'll happen because not only because you've worked your tail off for it, but also because you've had a lot of luck and help and good karma, and because it's supposed to happen when it happens.
And I find that a lot of the people that I talk to who really do get in there and achieve the things that they set out to do have a lot of great support around them.
That's really true. And I think, you know, I'm really happy doing what I'm doing now. And I think that's, you know, it's giving me validation that, you know, I can do it and I'm able to. And I hope the situation lasts for a really long time. But there's one other thing that I would like to do before my time on this earth is over. And that is, I want to try and help other young women or girls, you know, who might find themselves in the same situation that I was in when I was 16, with a teacher who, you know, doesn't believe in them, and a teacher who might discourage them from pursuing something that they want to do or that they love to do. So what I'm trying to do now is, my instrument rating is my first step to, I want to get my CFI. I want to become a certified flight instructor, and I want to focus on teaching girls and young women and older women who don't believe in themselves that they can do this too, right? They can do this. Anyone can do this. And I think it's so important to have people who look like you or feel like you or have been in a situation like you know, to lift you up. And that's kind of, you know, as much as I love my current job writing about aviation, and I hope it goes on for a really long time, I think that's sort of a passion that I still want to achieve in the next little while. I think it's so important that girls and women know that they can do it. And I'm just shocked and appalled at the fact that there's only 7% of all certified pilots here in the United States are female. I just can't get over that statistic. That is a colossal failure in our aviation education system. And I know I'm not going to change it, but maybe I can spark that interest in someone who will then go on and change it for, you know, in a more permanent way.
I think you can definitely make a difference. That's exactly what my experience was. When I was little, I used to travel a lot, and I'm from Puerto Rico, and I lived in a bunch of different places, and then my parents split up when I was little, and my mom and I went back to Puerto Rico, and she used to put me on a plane by myself, you know, and I'd go visit my dad in Houston, and I was like 8. And my grandmother was super passionate about flying and about travel, and it really did instill a great love for aviation in me, but I never saw a woman pilot. So when I was little, I always used to say that I wanted to be a flight attendant because I thought that's how I would get to be in airplanes a lot. So
right.
If you, like the stuff that you're describing, it would have made a difference for me when I was a little girl, and I'm sure it will make the difference for little girls who get to see you. And that's one of the reasons why I am so excited to do this podcast, because the more I keep putting interviews out there with all different sorts of female pilots, the more it gets out there. Not only does each individual girl or older woman realize, wow, I could actually do this. But I think the more you put it out there, the more it also just changes the way that all of society views, women pilots and our place in the aviation world and in the world.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And I feel sometimes that, who am I? I'm just a little private pilot. That's all I've got. I'm not the captain of a 747. I'm not someone who went through, an entire aviation program and is now, a commander of some sort in the Air Force, and is flying jet fighters. I am a small little private pilot who does this because it's fun, and who does it because she's wanted to drive an airplane since she was 6 years old. So I often feel like, why ask me? Because there's so many really, really accomplished pilots out there, so many women who have fought their way through the system and made it, and they're now a first officer, or they're a captain, or they're doing something incredibly crazy and cool in the commercial aviation space. And who am I? But I think that it's the little people that show that you need to just make that first step, right? And lift up your fellow women and girls so that they know themselves that they can do this. And I think it's that little first step. It's not little. That's the biggest step. It's the step to say and to believe in yourself and to say, look, I can do this. And then I'm not saying all the rest of the ratings and the, and the certificates and any of that, that's easy. It's most certainly is not. And I'm noticing that on my instrument rating right now. But it's that initial step and believing or saying to yourself, well, maybe this isn't such a crazy idea after all, and I think if young women see someone who looks like them to take that first step, I think the rest of it, they'll get a taste of it. And like you and me, they'll get bitten by the bug, and their own personal motivation will carry them as far as they would like to go.
And one might argue that flying for the fun of it is the purest and best reason. I think that we find jobs doing it because we have to make a living and we want to spend our time making a difference and making a contribution while doing something that we love and that we enjoy. But what's more, motivating than I love this is cool and I can,
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, when I decided or when I figured out that I was not going to be able to make it as a career, and I made that mind shift for myself, and I said, I am going to do this as long as it's fun. And the moment it turns into work, or the moment it becomes tedious, or the moment I feel like I have to do something, that's when I'm not going to fly anymore, because that's not what I want it to be. I want it to be an activity that I love, that I'm passionate about, that I don't want it to be something that I feel like, I have to do. And that moment hasn't come yet. So every time I get into an aircraft, I'm like, God, this is so cool. I can't believe I can do this. And I laugh at myself, right? Because it's just, I think back to that little 6-year-old blonde kid that took a peek inside a cockpit and said, wow, this is kind of neat. Let's see what we can do with this.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. And I feel that way sometimes about what I do. I still do music for a living. I'm a singer and a DJ. And I know that I'm doing the wrong gig when it just feels heavy and tedious to get to work. And I never want my life to be that way. It's a shame when something that you love turns into that. Sometimes it's not that it's time to leave like that activity, but maybe approach it from a different paradigm or something like that too.
Yeah, but I think intuitively when it's not right. There's a couple of situations also in my personal flying career where I got into the aircraft and I just wasn't myself, and I didn't get the joy out of it. And I knew that was not the day I was going to go fly, right? I knew that I had to not go, because when it's like that and your head is someplace not in the cockpit, that's when accidents happen, and that's when things become much more serious, than they should be. And I think that's, you always have to go into it with sort of a childlike joy and glee, at least for someone who doesn't do it as to make a living, or at least for someone like me or like you need to go into it with this sense of wonder at the technology and the fact that I can do this. This is crazy.
Knowing yourself and knowing when you're really not fully there is really important. Yesterday at the fly-in, I knew that I wasn't going to do any flying. I was exhausted, and I knew that my brain wasn't fully there. So I just wanted to enjoy the company and enjoy the flight and look out for traffic and contribute in any way that I could, during that flight. But that was definitely not doing any of the flying myself yesterday.
Sure, and you can contribute also not as pilot in command. There are many things you can do to support, and I think that's that type of feeling that comes with experience. I think a young pilot with very few hours can't estimate his or her abilities objectively. Yes, you have a certificate, yes, you are legal, but you have to ask yourself, are you competent? Do you have the experience to deal with a certain situation? And, and that comes with time, and it comes with hours, and it comes with experience. And if you know that of yourself in other activities, that's already a great advantage that you can then transfer onto your aviation. But I think it's a matter of survival, right? It's just wise. An instructor told me when I was a very young pilot, and I was having a lot of trouble. I had my certificate. It was in Germany, it was a very hot day, and I was having trouble landing, and I couldn't get the aircraft down. I was solo. I was alone in the aircraft, and I flew into an airfield about 100 miles away from my home airfield, and I couldn't land. I tried 3 times and I was panicking. I didn't know what the problem was. I got down and I started doing, what we called kangaroo bumps off the runway, and I couldn't bring her down. And I panicked on the radio, and I asked for someone on the field if there was anyone there that could talk me down, because I was terrified. And there was an instructor that was listening in on the radio, and he got on the radio, and he told me to do a couple of circuits and, not land, just fly over the field just to calm down a little bit. And then he said he would talk me down, and he would tell me exactly what to do and when to do it. And he basically saved my life that day. And he talked me down, and I landed, and I was crying, and I was upset, and it was hot. And I was terrified, and I parked the aircraft, and I got out of the aircraft, and I swore to myself I would never get back in again, because I just had scared the living daylights out of myself. And I, of course, went over to thank him for doing what he did. And I said, someone is going to have to fly that airplane back to my home airport, because I'm not going to do it. And then he said, well, I've got a student soloing, and he can. I'll sit with you in the aircraft. I'll fly you back to your home base. He can follow us, and he can pick me up and take me back home. And I said, that would be great. Thank you, because I'm not getting in that plane by myself anymore. And so we did that, and we got to my home airport. And, I thanked him again. And he said, this is something that stuck with me over the years. He said, we're all aviators. We're all in this little community, and we watch out for each other. And that's what we do. And I think that's a really, really great way to, pay it forward to someone else. That's what we do. That's the community we're in. And that's why we're there for each other. And it's a small community, and it's a community that not many people understand why we do it. But I think it's a very special place to be, and it's a lot of really interesting people with interesting stories. And that has remained with me all these years.
That's a really great story. I think we all have a moment that we hear ourselves or doubt, whether we're ever going to get back in that plane again. And then you get support like that from where you least expected. And that's one of the beautiful things about the aviation community, for sure.
From a stranger who had no stake in me, but he said, we watch out for each other, and that's why I did this.
Where was this?
This was in Germany. This is why I was still living in Germany. I got my certificate in April, and it was in July. It was literally like 2 months after I got my certificate. I had maybe 5 or 6 hours to my name post checkride.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's very new. If he hadn't been there to do that, maybe you never would have gotten back in an airplane, or maybe it would have been years, which is also why what your teacher did to you when you were in high school was so devastating. I don't know what makes someone think that it's okay to put your limitations and your judgment on somebody who has a dream and a passion.
I think it was also maybe a factor of the time. I mean, it was, this was the 80s, and I don't think we were sensitized to looking out for each other's strengths and supporting each other as maybe we are today. Or, I don't know what the school system is like. I haven't been in a school system for, 35 years, but it was at the time, I think it was just not questioned. It was just, who's this girl? She wants to be an engineer. What? I mean, she's not smart enough for that. And that was just accepted. And I think maybe today, I'm hoping that things have changed a little bit, but sometimes some of the stories I hear, I'm not sure it has. But maybe it's not as blatant as it was all that time ago. That that you were laughed at if you sort of danced a little bit outside of the parameters that you had been given as a 16-year-old girl. So I don't know. I think there are parts of the country where for example, I think in Silicon Valley there's a lot of programs that try to encourage girls or young women to go into the STEM careers or to pursue aviation as a career, or some more technical activity. And there's parts of the country where those types of programs don't exist. So I think it's a factor of the environment that you grow up in. And I'm just hoping that there's less of that type of thing around these days than there was back when I was a kid.
And I just think that as humans, we normally judge and begrudge, other people the things that we don't allow ourselves. For example, if I don't think it's okay to take some time off, then if somebody else tells me I'm going to take some time off, I'm going to be like, well, F you, what makes you think that you have the right to do that? So it was really probably she felt that way about herself, and then she was just projecting it on you.
Well, my teacher was a man, so he did likely. I have no idea. I think there was a male-female thing going on at the time as well. I don't know, but that's a really astute. That's a really great observation. Yes, I think that there's a lot of times that conflicts like that. It is projection of a sort, and I do feel though that as I've gotten older, I'm more relaxed about that type of thing. I don't really care what other people think, and I just go off and do my own thing anyway. So at 16, you're very impressionable, and you want to do the right thing, and you want to get into the right college, and you want to make sure your grade point average stays up there. But in the meantime, I've realized that there are so many different ways to be successful, and not just one.
Right. Let me ask you, do you have a favorite flight that you've ever flown?
I'm sure that, I mean, I've flown so many incredibly beautiful flights. I think, you know, where I am now in the San Francisco Bay Area, I mean, that has to rank up there among the most spectacular, you know, sightseeing flights ever on Earth. You know, I've flown in South America and Argentina. I've flown in Germany and Switzerland. I've flown in Canada, up in the Rocky Mountains around, you know, Calgary and Banff. Oh my goodness, I've flown. Wow, I've been so privileged to have done so many cool flights. But I have to say, where I'm at right now, I can just drive down the road, hop in a plane at Hayward Executive Airport, and in 15 minutes I'm flying over the Golden Gate Bridge. That is probably among the coolest aviation adventures on Earth.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it sucks. But so here's what I haven't told you. My husband's from Argentina, and one of the things that I'd really love to do sometime is, after I have my certificates and some hours and a partner who's adventurous and hopefully much more experienced than I'd love to do like a flight all the way down to Argentina. I think that would be an incredible experience.
Yeah, I often read about people's flying adventures, you know, cross country or, you know, from the top of the continent to the bottom of the continent, and they sound amazing. They sound really amazing. And I think what I would like to do one day is really to fly one time just across the entire United States, because there's so much to see. A few years ago, my husband and I did a cross-country road trip. So we drove actually from Boston out here to the Bay Area, and we took 4.5 weeks to do it. And we saw everything on the ground. I mean, we didn't go in a straight line, and we zigzagged all over the place. And I would like to do a trip like that across the country in a small airplane and, you know, meet the people along the way and see the places that you don't generally see that are off the beaten path. So I think that's, if I could articulate a dream flight, it would be to cross this great country. But the one you're suggesting is pretty cool too. I'd love to do that.
Well, your idea sounds really great too. I've crossed the country by car 4 times between California and Florida, but I've never been able to just take the time to do it. There's always a gig on the other end. Yeah, It's like a timeline, and getting to even do that without rushing would be amazing. I wanted to ask you about where you flew in Argentina and what were the circumstances around that.
So my father is Argentine, and he and I were visiting his family down in Buenos Aires. They realized that a friend of my uncle's owns a small airplane, and, do you want to go for a flight? And we just did a bit of a sightseeing tour north of the city, over the delta of the river, you know, just over the countryside through the city of Luján, which is north of Buenos Aires. Just about an hour-long sightseeing flight with this friend. You know, it was also a different experience, you know, having all of the radio chatter in Spanish was another experience. That was one thing I wanted to talk about earlier, though. When I came to the United States from Europe, the most difficult part for me in flying here was working the radios, just because in Europe, when they speak English, it's usually English is a second language for most of the controllers and a lot of the pilots. So they speak quite slowly and understandably and articulate quite clearly on the radios. And I got here to the United States, and all of a sudden it's like, November 1, 2, 3, 4, Charlie Delta, and I was like, what? Can you repeat, please? You know, so that was the hardest part about coming back here, was learning the lingo on the radios, because everybody speaks very quickly here compared to when English is your second language. And that's the part that freaks me out the most here in flying in the United States is the radios. I'm just always afraid I'm never going to understand what they're trying to tell me.
You know, I feel that way too. I find that super challenging. And Spanish and English are both my first language, so to speak. I speak them equally. I grew up speaking both. Man, you'd think that it's like my third language sometimes when I'm listening to these people on the radio.
But, so I bought myself a little handheld, and I actually, when I'm bored, I turn it on and I just listen to it. And you kind of I just tune in one of the local frequencies here, one of the local, towers or online, right? And I just listen to it, and I think 90% of understanding is knowing what to expect. And if you kind of know what's going to come, then you can understand it more easily. And it's, that's a lot of, again, that's experience and preparation. And, the more often I fly a bay tour here in the Bay Area, the better I understand stuff that's going on. And, obviously I understand the airspace, but, what's going on in each of the sectors and, who's coming from where. And, if you know what to expect, I think that makes it a lot easier.
Right. And in all fairness, if I do think back to the first couple of flights that I took, what I understand now and how, and the level of difficulty in understanding between when I started and now, I have come a long way. It's just sometimes I'm like, seriously, like, what the hell are you saying?
Of course you have, and I think you realize that it's baby steps, right? It's every flight and every lesson is just one little baby step more, and and now that I'm doing my instrument certificate, it's for me. It's someone explained this to me. They said, private is like kindergarten, and all of a sudden you're adulting for the first time. And it's, it's information overload, and you actually have to be an adult about it. And I'm still getting used to that. I'm still trying to figure that bit out.
That's a great way of putting it. I've been actually thinking of downloading that app, Live ATC, where you get
great.
I think I need some more time listening. And, Los Angeles, like the Bay Area, is so busy. Yesterday, everybody was flying. It was beautiful out, and everybody was up in the air. So you're trying to get a word in, and everybody's speaking even faster than usual,
Yeah, those are the challenges, but you know that if everybody else is up there, you know that you got it right. You know that you're where you need to be.
This is true. This is a very good point. Do you have any advice for aspiring pilots and student pilots?
I think the biggest piece of advice is you need to believe in yourself, and you can do it. And even if it seems very, very difficult, or you run into a roadblock of some sort, you need to go inside yourself and know that, there are people that are significantly stupider than you are that have done this. So just go out there and do it, because you can. And I think if you apply yourself, I'm not one of those people that got straight A's in school without looking at a textbook. I had to work hard for it. But again, at some point I sat down and I said, I'm not too dumb for this. I can do this too, and I'm going to prove to myself that I can. So I know it's really hard sometimes, and the goal seems really, really far away, but I honestly believe that if you apply yourself to do something and you are motivated by reasons that are, self-improvement or you're just passionate about something and you want to do it, I strongly believe that is the biggest part of learning how to do something, is believing in yourself and saying that you can, and believing that, and like a mantra every day, and you will achieve what it is you set out to achieve. Again, I think too many girls and women are discouraged from pursuing a technical or an aviation career or certificate, or just for fun like I was, because they're told that either they're not smart enough, or they'll never learn how to do it, or it's too this or too that. And it's hard because you feel like you're walking up against a wall. But like we were discussing earlier, there's support out there. There's Facebook groups. There's YouTube videos. There's all these resources that didn't exist 20 years ago when I was doing my own private. They exist now, and take advantage of them. And there's so much free information out there. Yes, it's a lot of work, but if you really truly believe that that's something that you're passionate about and that you really want to achieve something, of course you can do it. There's no question.
That is excellent advice and just what I needed to hear, because I'm in a place where I get tired. But my husband tells me all the time, it's like, 16-year-old kids are doing this. I don't think this is too hard for you.
No, and every person, comes at it from a different place in their life, and you can't question where people are coming from, right? Everybody's got their own, is in their own head, in their own headspace. They've got their own history. They have their own experiences, and maybe some people have been told once too often that they're too dumb for it, and that's why they don't believe in themselves. But I really firmly believe that it's within anyone's reach. Some people will work harder for it than others, but if it's something you truly, truly want, I keep saying life is not a dress rehearsal, right? We only get to do this once. And I want to make the most of every single day that I have. And part of me is flying, is aviation. And that's what's important to me.
And that concludes my conversation with Pilar Wolfsteller and this third episode of Chicks Who Fly. If you want to reach out to us, please contact us at chickswhofly.com. Thank you so much for listening and for being a part of this awesome journey. We look forward to hanging out with you next time on Chicks Who Fly.